there was actually some coaches that were very high profile, very big hot seats that were retained. They did enough to keep their jobs. And also there was expensive buyouts. So Billy Napier stays at Florida. Dave Aranda stays at Baylor. Mike Gundy stays at Oklahoma State, although that got pretty contentious and he had to take a pay cut. That got a little sideways. Sam Pittman stays at Arkansas. And even Trent Dilfer stays at UAB, even though that's been a complete disaster. So what do you make broadly about that? That we're heading into this revenue share era where these schools, these power conference schools, are going to be spending, maybe there's a new $20 million line item for paying players directly, and there's not that much movement in the power conferences.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? You look at athletic departments and you look at TV contracts and you see the money that's coming in, and it would be like a person who is a high income earner, right? Like money's just coming in. But then on the other side, you have all of these expenses of what it takes to run an athletic department. And so when it's time to make changes, it'd be like if you made a lot of money, but you maybe, overextended yourself. And it's like, I want to get a new car, but I'm upside down on the current car. I can't sell it right now. I got to wait and write it out and maybe see if I can get into a better position to where it makes sense to get rid of it down the line. I think that's kind of what we have seen with some of these P4 schools is like, do I want to make a change? Yeah, maybe I want to make a change, but is that the best thing for us to do with some of the expenses that we have right now? So I do think it makes a lot of sense. Like, I think some of these coaches should feel a little bit thankful for the new world that we're in, because it's giving athletic departments the opportunity to be more patient, or maybe forcing them to be more patient, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I know this isn't exactly about the question you asked. Billy Napier, have you seen Florida's upcoming schedule? It's basically the same thing they had last year. Like, Florida's getting hosed right now. Like, I hope everything works out, because they were really fun to watch when they were playing well this year, but their schedule is doing them no favors for next year.
No, but they still have DJ Lagway, and which I assume was a big part about retaining him, right? Where he was immediately like, yes, that's my guy. I'm obviously staying. But I think that, to your point, it's not just even the line item, like the extra expense, but also, don't you have enough smart people around you saying, hey, maybe we should, instead of having dead money and a buyout, why don't we invest in NIL deals, in the rev share piece of this? Like, why not put the money where the talent is and see if that makes a difference? And I think that's really smart. And we're seeing that in a lot of different ways. We're seeing it not work in some ways, but then you can, like, so Indiana basketball, they spent a lot of money, got key players, big time transfers. It didn't work. Mike Woodson's out at the end of the year. But at least if you're Indiana, you can be like, hey, we tried. We did everything. We pushed
figured
all
out that the coach was actually the problem.
And the coach was the problem, right? You're like, you're crossing everything else off the list. So you have a couple different elements. Like, one, it's just, you should be spending the money on trying to get the best talent in supporting the players, but also, yes, like, then you can kind of weed out, what is the issue? Is it a resource problem? What needs to change for success? So that's part of this. And then I just think in general, the Group of Five programs, they're not going to be spending as much in the rev share. Their NIL isn't the same level in a lot of places. So I think there's still just more of the usual dynamics in a coaching change of, like, it's not working. These buyouts are not like $20 million. Like, we need to ignite our fan base. We need season ticket renewals. We need this, and this. And so I think you just saw, the normal level of impatience in a lot of these places. And, again, a couple years into a realigned world where different conferences and different schools have maybe different expectations. So people are making moves. But I think it's just a totally different world without talking about the size of the buyouts and the rev share component of this not looking the same.
Yeah, I will say this about the G5 ranks, and I think we've seen a little bit of it, and I'm curious if it happens more, is, a lot of times it would be, you go from being a coordinator at a big school to being a head coach at the G5 school, and then you move up to being a head coach at, wherever else, right? Like, you just kind of keep going up the ladder. It feels like right now we might be in a place where you're the head coach at the G5 school and you end up taking the coordinator job at the P4 school, because you get more money in a lot of instances doing that. The way some of these coordinators are getting paid right now, it's absolutely ridiculous. But you also get to coach ball, and you're not worried about all the other things that go along with it. So, down the line, as we start to settle into this new world, I'm curious how that impacts G5, just from their ability to retain really good head coaches that might just be looking for an exit door for more money, maybe a little bit more face time at a bigger school, or just to not have to deal with all of the crazy chaos and not getting paid the $8 million other coaches are getting paid to do.
We saw a good amount of that last cycle,
Yeah.
heading into the 2024 season with multiple coaches like Mo Lindquist and other people leaving, maybe getting out ahead of hot seats, but some just voluntarily leaving to become coordinators or position coaches elsewhere. And then I think too, and I mentioned Willie Simmons as another example of someone doing that. In this cycle, you did have head coaches like Gus Malzahn decide to be coordinators at different programs as well. So you have some of that. But I also think we're seeing, at least at the G5 hires, there were a number of hires of like FCS coaches, like lower level coaches, head coaches with track records being bumped up instead of like the hotshot, coordinators, the assistants. And some of that is salary based, right? If you're making a lot more money as a coordinator in the SEC, you're not going to take one of those jobs. But I think also, like, we talked about this so much with Kurt Signetti. We've talked about it with Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman. Like, there are some really, really good coaches that win with way less resources than you would have in FBS. And so maybe people were looking at that a little bit differently, as well as like financially that bump up made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole finance thing is really interesting. Like, you got position coaches at some of these big schools that are making 800, 900,000, $1 million a year, right? And so, like, I could understand where you say that you would have to look down a level in competition, and you could probably find yourself a steadier, more known commodity, ready to be a head coach than trying to go after one of the hot shot names that you see at one of these bigger schools. So pipelines start to change a little bit, but ultimately you might end up doing yourself a favor because you get a guy who's done the job before.